we're moving on to section 13, where we need to make sure consultants identify the state where the PE license is registered, where the PE is registered. What are you finding in some submissions?
It's just a little nit. What we would like, and this really isn't that big of a problem, but where you identify, in particular, the PEs and their license numbers, we also would like you to identify the state that the license comes from. Because when you look at the NPRs, you know, we are requiring Louisiana licenses, and we want to make sure that the licenses that are identified are in fact Louisiana licenses when the NPR requires that.
Okay. And also copies of certifications unless asked. You find firms are submitting certifications, it's not necessary.
That's correct. For example, with the PEs, we don't require them to submit their license to us. So unless there are any other types of if there are any types of certifications required, doesn't necessarily mean we want to have them in our hand. We just want you to understand that they are required to have those certifications, and if some point in the future we think we need to look at them, we'll ask for them at that time. But you don't need to submit those with the proposal unless the advertisement specifically asks for it.
Okay. And then just to repeat that resumes that are attached that are not identified in the org chart will not be evaluated.
That's correct.
Okay. Section 14.
Well, a couple other things I want to show on section 13. I want to show it by going to the ad with regard to the NPRs. And the NPRs are always in attachment B to the advertisement. Okay, and the first thing is, you know, this is typically what you would see would be something like this, where we say, for example, at least one professional land surveyor, and you know what the requirements are. You got to remember, this is minimum personnel requirements. When we say at least one, you know, we're looking for one or maybe two or whatever, but sometimes they will identify, consultants will identify 5 or 10 people as meeting the NPR, which is really kind of overkill. At least one means at least one. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to identify 5 or 10.
If you really wanted to see 5 or 10, you would put
right
at least 10.
Right, and it's not that those people aren't important, because if those people are important and relevant to this particular project and they're going to be working on this project, they will be identified in the org chart, which means we're going to evaluate them anyway. But you don't necessarily have to have them on the NPR. And let's see, one other point I want to make on that is, oh yeah, down at the bottom. A lot of times you'll see qualifiers at the bottom of the NPRs. And what that means is, and let me just kind of sort the implication is that every one of these individuals have to be a separate individual. So in this case, we would expect that there would be 11 individuals doing this particular effort. However,
because you've listed, just for those, you've listed 11 different personnel.
That's correct.
At least.
Right. However, what we will do, oftentimes, probably more times than not, we will say that some of these you can double up on, so you don't necessarily have to have a total of 11 people. For example, on this one here, you may be able to use just one person to satisfy NPRs 1 and 2. So you wouldn't need to necessarily have 2 people to satisfy that. One person can do it. Same thing is true with 4 and 5 and 6 and 7.
But just because you know someone could fulfill 1 and 2, if you have not in the advertisement said that that's what you will accept that as the same person, just do not assume, if you're the firm, that I know Mike Gorbaty can fulfill both. If DOTD has not said they will accept that,
that's
then
right.
You don't make that assumption.
Yeah,
because they will be looking for those resumes in that org chart to meet that requirement.
So for example, if you have Jane Doe identified as meeting NPRs 1 and 2, that's okay. But if you have her also identified as meeting NPR 3, well then you got a problem, because we didn't say 1, 2, and 3. We just said 1 and 2. And where it becomes to be a real problem is if on that NPR number 3 you've only identified that one person, Jane Doe. Well, when I take Jane Doe out, there's nobody left satisfying that NPR.
So, okay.
So what we will do in those instances, that doesn't necessarily automatically make you non-responsive. What we will do is we will go back with a clarification and see if there's someone else on the team that you have already identified that can meet that NPR. And then if you had, for example, like I told you, a lot of times people will put 2 and 3 people on an NPR even though it only asks for 1. As long as you still have 1 still remaining, you're okay.
Okay. Section 14, this is about experience
Yeah.
contained in the resumes.
Yeah, and this is one that we've run into some problems with recently, and it's one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about today. And that is, you need to make sure that the experience that we are requesting is identified in the resume. For example, going back over here, let's see, let me go back there a second. Like here we asked for a CE, or PE rather, with a minimum of 10 years of experience in roadway design. So over here in the resumes, you put Jane Doe once again, and say that it's CE and PE, sorry, and with the licenses and things like that. And then when you go to their resume, let's see, where's that real quick. Okay. The resume right here in 14, where we said 10 years, we don't mean 10 years with that firm, we mean 10 years experience doing whatever that function was. Well, what has happened, and it just happened just recently on one of the advertisements, even though the person who was identified was with the firm for 30 years doing this type of work, when they listed their projects, they only listed 7 years worth of projects. Well, that didn't meet the NPR because it required 10 years.
If someone is just using the last several years of experience, but the individual's experience goes back 30 years, you want to see 30 years of experience?
Not 30 years, I want to see at least
the 10, if that's the required.
Right.
So they may have 30, they may have 15, as long as they have 10, but they need to reflect those experience dates going back as far as you want.
As
If
the
you
NPR
only
requires.
needed 5 years of experience, then the experience dates only need, and the projects only need to go back 5 years.
I'd go back 6 just
You'd
to make
go
sure.
back 6, okay.
But like I said, in this one particular instance, even though we know that this person had 30 years worth of experience doing this particular work, they only showed projects going back 7 years and the requirement was for 10.
And might that be deemed a non-responsive
Well,
applicant?
necessarily be deemed a non-responsive proposal as long as there was someone else that they had that could satisfy that.
But you might be hurting yourself if you don't
Right.
adequately
Because
reflect
that person can't
a
be
person
used.
with the experience, but you're not completing the form accurately to reflect that.
Right.
Again, you talked about if you're including resumes, but they're not identified in the org chart, then they're not going to be reviewed.
That's correct. And then once again, you don't have to worry about bringing or including any of the certifications. You don't need them unless we specifically ask for them.
So then we'll go to section 17.
Okay, section 17. This is the part of the 24102 where the consultants let us know how much outstanding work is still with DOTD and what the value of that work is. And the problem here is several actually. One is, and let me point out real quick, down here at the bottom where we've got the asterisk, it says round to the nearest dollar, do not round to the nearest thousands. Well, notwithstanding that statement there, some people will still round to the thousands, and that's going to require clarification because we don't know if they mean a really large number or a really small number. So just go with whatever the number is, round it to the nearest dollar. The other problem we have is math. We will add up all of the various project values just to confirm that it equals the total, and
It won't.
a lot of times it doesn't. So once again, that's just a clarification request where we go back and ask to clarify, you know, what's wrong? Is it the numbers up here, or is it the number down there? But they don't add up right.
And if you have no balance, but you have a project, you put 0.
Yeah, and please do that. Either you, NA,
Add that,
NA
include the
or
project.
0. Give us something to know that you saw this, and you put either a 0 or NA there, that you didn't just overlook it. And that's how we know you didn't overlook it, by putting either an NA or a 0 in the total.
But you also say projects with 0 remaining balance should not be listed.
That's correct.
And you mentioned the total needs to be correct.
Right. And
And then QA/QC plans.
right. Let me go to that real quick, because QA/QC plan may be required at the time the proposal is submitted. And I'm going to show you where that's at real quick. There we go. Okay. I'll highlight this right here. If the project is not a bridge design project, only the selected consultant will have to submit a QA/QC plan to us for evaluation, and that will be done, like this says, within 10 business days of the award notification to the consultant. So when it's not a bridge design project, the QA/QC plan is not required to be submitted with the proposal, and is not a part of the evaluation. However, if it is a bridge design project, this is the applicable language. And what that says is, if the services, scope of services that are identified as attachment A include bridge design, then the QA/QC plan must be a part of the DOTD form 24102, and it will be a part of the evaluation.
Okay.